Welcome to QWEandMe, the podcast that explores the many paths to becoming a solicitor in England and Wales. I'm Rob Dudley, Head of Employability and Engagement at BARBRI. And in each episode, I'm going to be chatting with recently qualified solicitors, BARBRI alumni, SQE students, and industry insiders. QWE offers incredible flexibility and opportunities, but it can also be a really confusing thing to manage and navigate. That's why we're here, to share real stories and practical advice to help you make confident choices about your career. So let's dive in. So welcome everybody. My name is Rob. I'm joined here today with Amit Kapoor. Amit, thank you so much for being here today with us for our QWE Journeys with BARBRI podcast.
Thanks for having me here, Rob.
No problem. Amit, I understand you are now a qualified solicitor here in London and a former student of ours through the SQE.
Yes.
I just wondered whether we could maybe talk about your qualifying work experience journey, how you got to where you are now, and perhaps a little bit of insight to help our prospective and current students understand the journey that you took and the sort of challenges, hurdles, opportunities that came your way through that journey.
Sure, very happy to.
Fantastic. So why don't I just start off by asking you a little bit about, looking back, why you decided to go into the legal profession?
So I qualified as a graduate back in 2000. So this was a really long time, a quarter of a century back. And I don't think I had the aspiration of becoming a lawyer then. It only came about 10 years after that, when I first had an employment incident that led me to become part of a tribunal proceedings. And watching the judge, watching the solicitors operate there, somehow motivated me in a positive way of trying to be one of them, trying to be the person who gives the comfort, gives the clarity, gives the light to a dispute. And I tried to reason myself out of it for a long time because I was in a stable career. But that thought never went away.
Okay.
So when I heard about the SQE, fast forward 11 years later, I decided I was going to do something about it and let that aspiration turn into reality.
Gosh, that's fantastic. I mean, it's not an unusual story. So many people that we speak to have been inspired by their own kind of personal experience to go into the legal profession. So it's great to hear that something really kind of motivated you towards it from your own experience. And so you talked about having a career before this. What sort of challenges, I suppose, did you come up against when, I suppose, considering that law might be a career for you? What were the kind of steps, I suppose, that you took?
Yes. So initially, when I thought I wanted to become a lawyer, I was trying to find a halfway house between what I was doing, which was more of a commercial management role on IT programs,
Right.
and try to deal with things which are more legally oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So I initially started taking a lot of contracts management work, so looking at large IT contracts, making sure that the teams that I represent are following their obligations and so on. And then something didn't feel enough with that, and I felt I was still far away from being a lawyer. So I started looking for more contentious work within contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So contracts where disputes are happening between the buyer and the supplier. But I realized that part of my job was actually to resolve those and be there in the steady state. So
Yeah.
there were very few opportunities where I was stuck in a program which was in a dispute for a long time. My job was to support the program when that was not happening. So I decided to again bridge the gap between that and the lawyer by trying to become an arbitrator. So I became a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators somewhere around 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I passed the exams and I had the qualifications MCI ARB after my name. But again, nothing came out of that because it's quite difficult to get an arbitral appointment as a non-qualified lawyer. So again, it kind of went back into the backseat and it just kind of simmered. I kept doing things which were legal activities,
Right.
but never internally did I feel I was actually a lawyer. So, and that thought of becoming one never went away.
So from a career perspective, I guess it limited you to, yes, okay, a great achievement to have been
Yes.
chartered as an arbitrator, but actually without you being a qualified lawyer, you were limited as to how much
I could use.
additional, yeah, exactly, additional kind of opportunities there might be available to you, I suppose, within the profession. So I suppose in terms of the sort of next step in the journey, it was then obviously to look at presumably the SQE as a way of qualifying. How did you go about finding out about that, and what sort of experience did you have doing your SQE?
Sure. I think finding about the SQ was probably accidental for me. I mean, I can't really exactly recall what happened, but it was probably a Financial Times article that I read about this new way of entering into the profession.
Mhm.
And I read about that in 2021. So this was COVID times when everyone had a lot of time at their hands, if they were not affected by COVID, obviously. And I used to think about these things. And um, at that point, I even ordered course material from one of the providers, but I quickly decided that was just too difficult, and I
Mhm.
returned them back within my cooling off period.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I just stayed put in, but the thought never went away. So 2 years later, I still decided to pursue it, and I took it on from there.
And how was the experience for you? It was pretty early days of the SQE in 2021.
Yes. So initially, I felt it was going to be very difficult
Mhm.
because when you read about the SQE on public forums and comments to articles, all of the narrative is very negative,
Mm,
uh, and it does make you feel it beyond your reach as someone who hasn't invested the time doing a law degree. uh, I felt I was going to be on the back foot. I used to watch some of the videos of people who claimed they were top quintiles, and I
mm.
wondered, oh my God, that must be such an incredible achievement. I couldn't be one of them. Let me just barely pass.
Yeah, yeah.
So it all felt quite difficult,
Yeah,
quite difficult.
quite overwhelming, I guess, at the
Yes,
time.
yes,
And also it was untested, wasn't it? So I guess, being one of the first to go through it was, quite a big hurdle
yes.
in that way. But I suppose when we think about the experience that you'd had with the exposure to the law
Hmm,
for the last, however many years before that, did you feel when we think about the sort of qualifying work experience component of
sure.
SQE, which is frankly so flexible now that
Hmm,
people have the opportunity to pursue it in frankly any way that they want to. They can either do it through, at the formal kind of 2-year training contract that still exists, that many,
hmm.
many firms still use and offer. But of course, you've also got the opportunity to do it in up to 4 different opportunities. Now, I understand from your experience that, of course, you used your experience sort of retrospectively because you'd had experience already.
Yes.
Talk me through how that actually worked in practice.
Right. So obviously, all of my QWE experience was, collected in very blissful ignorance. I wasn't aware I was going to call upon that
Yeah.
experience someday in the future. My work involved working on programs, drafting contracts,
Mhm.
sometimes drafting change notices, sometimes being the port of call for my program teams. If they ever had issues about the contract, they would come to me first,
Okay.
and I would decide if that was something that then needed to be farmed out to a lawyer,
Mhm.
either internal or external. So I was essentially briefing those lawyers, preparing, doing the initial fact finding for them,
Yeah.
and helpfully helping them focus on just what mattered.
Right.
So, when I look back at what the Legal Services Act provides for, I, c- I could clearly see that all of what I was doing was relevant. They were all legal activities in terms of the Act. And when I started collecting that in the SRA provided template, where you kind of record what you have done, in my case, over 10 years,
Mhm.
I could see that I could fill almost every placeholder they had.
Oh, really?
So, from collecting information to providing legal advice to
Mhm.
understanding your limits. In my case, I even helped a friend with his employment tribunal proceedings, so I had something to say on the advocacy elements as
Mhm.
well, which the person who confirmed my QW thought was very unusual.
Okay.
So I did a lot of those things, and I had something to say on each of those blocks. And that's when I realized that my experience was actually worthwhile.
Mhm.
Um, it's one of the things that doesn't get mentioned a lot is, you can collect all this experience as a paralegal, but you don't get paid an awful lot.
No.
But because I was working in a contracts management field, which is a profession by itself,
Yeah.
uh, I was kind of handsomely paid for all of what I did. So there was no compromise. In fact, the bigger challenge would have been to switch from that field onto law, because laws, it's quite difficult to make a good fortune in this field, is what I'm finding.
So you were working within a contracts space, I suppose, but for what type of organization at
Sure.
that time?
So initially, I was working for private sector organizations, large FTSE 100 companies, but I kind of found my home working in the public sector. So I worked for two large central government departments from about 2015. Much of that experience was qualifying work experience.
Yeah.
Because I had two roles, essentially working as a contracts manager, which was clearly qualifying work experience, but also working on their procurements. Now, typically, if someone's working in procurement within a private sector organization, that would not be qualifying work experience.
No.
But within the public sector, working on procurement is covered by legislation. So in my case, it was the Public Contract Regulations 2015 and now replaced by the Procurement Act. So incidentally, all of the work I was doing could be construed as being legal activity.
Yeah. And sort of practically,
Hmm.
how did it work? You mentioned already about the fact that you obviously met more than two of the competencies for the under the Legal Services Act,
Yes.
which is fantastic because a lot of people that we speak to find that they are struggling to meet two sometimes, or to evidence two, but you were obviously able to evidence far more. How did it work practically for you to have that experience signed off? Did you use somebody externally, or did you go back to people who'd supervised you previously? How did it work on a practical basis?
Yes, so it was slightly tricky
Hmm.
because I had obviously worked with lawyers in the different roles,
Yeah.
but neither them nor I knew that there would come a day where I would call upon them to validate my experience and my involvement. And in many cases, I was not working under them as someone supporting them. I was effectively working as an internal or an external customer to them. Right. So it obviously, they talked very well at the time, but
Yeah.
I think the real issue was not so much, what they thought about my work. It was the surprise that SRA seemed to have put them on this pole position where they were to confirm my experience and effectively decide if I was to become a solicitor.
Yeah.
And I don't think the two people I approached ever really got to grips with that. So in one of the cases, I didn't get a response. In the other case, someone did make initial inquiries with me and wanted to help me, but he felt it was the organization that ought to do that because that's how references are taken. So I couldn't get very far with that.
Okay.
So eventually I decided the best course of action for me would be to use an external QWE confirmer.
Got it.
Now, thankfully, what had happened over the last 10 years is much of my roles were done under my own companies. So I was effectively a contractor to all these various public departments and to the private sector organizations before. So the activity involved onboarding him as my external solicitor monitor and then take him through a bundle of documents that were in my possession. Obviously, a lot is not because it's company IP, but some was. Essentially, things like documents you would produce from your own devices whilst you don't have the company's laptop. So those stuff would be with me. Any documents that I created that talk about me handing over items there to them and confirming that because that was something I could have kept with me. So it was just collating a bundle out of that, walking the external QWE confirmer through it, and he was very clearly satisfied that that met more than the two competencies we required. And in my case, the approach we took was, although I'd worked for 10 years as a contracts manager, it was arguable that a lot of it might be not QWE. A substantial portion would not be QWE by virtue of the fact that it wasn't within the legal department.
Yes.
So we decided that we'd take an approach where 50% of that is QWE. So in my case, I ended up with about 60 months of QWE out of the 10 years of work I did, which was
16 months.
60.
Oh, 5 years. Wow. Okay. 50%. Okay.
Yes. So I was clearly safe. I'd done all of it in different forms. And it would have been a shame if I had to, despite all that, then do a training contract.
Yes. Yeah, that would have been, gosh, that would have been another hurdle for you. But it's interesting what you're saying in the sense that your experience is it's so varied over that 10-year period. I know, as you're saying, only sort of 50% of it, 5 years was could be seen as being sort of meeting the criteria for qualifying work experience. But I wonder to what extent your qualifying work experience um, gave you, I suppose, a sort of goal for your future career. Did any of the experience, both public and private sector, give you a motivation towards a particular area? Did you know once you were fully qualified what you wanted to do and where you wanted to work?
Yeah.
Talk me through that.
No, very good question. So, by virtue of the fact that I was working on the technology programs and I really enjoyed it. So, I enjoyed working on programs. It's just that I had a preference for more contentious bits. I like high stakes situations, and
Mm,
that wasn't something that always came in.
yeah,
If it came in, it was accidental,
yeah,
not something I could engineer.
yeah.
So, my job was to resolve it and maintain it for steady state. But I clearly knew where I was at my best,
Mm,
and it was in those contentious situations.
okay.
And I was kind of dispute starved by the time I qualified. So I knew that I was going to build a career that had a big contentious component to it.
Hmm.
Um, it's come about in technology programs, but also employment work that I do. And I just make sure that in my practice now, that doesn't fully go away.
Yeah.
I mean, I work for a solicitor who is largely focused on non contentious work,
Okay.
but somehow I have managed a situation where I do a lot of work for him, but then also under my own name, which allows me to do a lot of contentious work as well. Because I can see that all of non-contentious work is not going to keep me fulfilled.
No, that's a really interesting observation, and I wonder whether you've got plans for the future, knowing where you are now, what you sort of feel you might want to go into in the next 5 years or so, as a result of both having such a varied amount of qualifying work experience, but now what you're doing in contentious areas in your current role. Do you feel as though that's going to be something you want to continue doing for the next 5, 10 years, or do you think you'd like to explore other areas as well?
Yeah, so I think in my case, I'm fairly clear that I'm going to focus largely on employment,
Hmm.
commercial disputes, and
Okay.
contract law. And I think what I find fascinating about employment law in particular is it touches on so many other areas of law.
Mm.
When you're dealing with misconduct dismissals, you're looking at criminal law,
Yeah.
and you're looking at conflicts of interest. You're sometimes touching on business law. What is the third party interest? And it's so varied,
Mm.
especially because I have kind of learned my law a bit on the field, in
Yeah.
the courts, in time. I feel quite comfortable in that arena. And commercial disputes as well, because I've done that as part of my role. I feel I can add a lot of value. If anything, I'll probably narrow it down even further
Hmm.
and focus on certain types of commercial disputes,
Yeah.
certain types of employment tribunal issues in the future, just to keep the practice manageable.
Yes.
Because right now, I think I have got too many different things going on, and I'd like to kind of make it a sustainable practice, focusing on a few things.
But, which is great because I think actually sometimes if you've got so much experience across multiple practice areas, it can be a bit of a minefield as to
Mm.
knowing where you really want to sort of concentrate your focus, I suppose. But to that point, looking back on your experience, if you'd sort of had your time again, I suppose, would the idea of doing a more kind of formal training contract with a law firm, for example, would that have appealed to you, or do you feel like you got much more benefit from doing it the way that you did through almost not even realizing
Mm.
that what you were doing could be used towards your qualifying work experience?
So I don't have any regrets not
Okay,
doing a
good.
training contract. And it's largely because the economic case for doing a training contract would simply not have stacked up for me.
Yeah.
By the time I had an interest in law, I already had a family and young children.
Mm,
And I think it would have, made me feel quite bad if
hmm.
I was spending time, stressing myself out on a training contract
Yeah.
uh, just for the sake of accumulating 2 years.
Hmm.
And that too at wages which would clearly have been a compromise for me,
Mm,
coming from a well settled profession.
hmm.
So One of the things that appealed to me about the SQE was it was possible to shortcut my way into becoming a solicitor because I had all of that. And
Mhm.
if I had known that the gap to becoming a solicitor was 4 year or 3 year gap, I would simply not have ventured into it.
No.
In my case, what actually happened was from the time I thought about becoming a solicitor to actually completing all the requirements to becoming one, that entire period was between two successive Easters.
Gosh, so very quick.
Very quick.
Yeah.
So SQE1 with a preparation time of around 4 months
Okay.
and an SQE2 within the next 6 months.
Mhm.
So I think about 10, 11 months, I finished everything from A to Z with the QWE already banked. So yeah, if it was longer than that, I would not have ventured.
No, so that flexibility and the ability to retrospectively use your experience was a huge game changer for you,
Indeed.
deciding to go towards the SQE. That's really good to hear because ultimately that's why the SQE came in. The idea was that it needed to provide much more accessibility and flexibility for people and people who'd worked in the sector for many years who had been unable under the old system to be able to qualify. So it's wonderful that you've been able to take advantage of that. Um, Obviously, my background is very much in the careers and employability space, and I'm always interested to hear, particularly for people like yourself who've had a career before they've gone into the law, as to how useful your previous career was to you in terms of perhaps skills
Sure.
in you now being a practitioner.
Mm.
Do you feel as though that's something that has helped rather than coming straight out of university and going into legal training?
No, I think all of my experience is indeed very relevant.
Hmm.
In fact, when I now talk with clients, I don't feel or find the situation very different to
Mm.
what it was before.
Right.
Because usually I am in a position that I'm still advising them, which was the case in my previous role. It's just the agenda of what I do has slightly shifted.
Hmm.
And it's also the case that previously, when I was working as a contracts manager, which was akin to an in-house counsel,
Yeah.
you often just get told enough to, get your stamp because that's essentially what how many people see in-house counsel as. But as a private practice solicitor, what I find is people want to share more with me and people want to open up, which personally I find very gratifying and fulfilling. Uh, but it makes my job easy because I know
Yeah.
everything I need to know to make a decision or to provide advice. So I think providing advice was naturally part of the role I previously had. It's just that now, uh, I'm supported by this body of knowledge, which is law,
Yeah.
and I'm providing legal advice. It's still high stakes. Now it was high stakes then.
Yeah. That's interesting, but maybe you're seen more as a sort of specialist now,
Indeed.
more of of somebody who's got, as you say, that body of knowledge that people are coming to as an expert
Yes.
in that space.
Yes.
Um, I suppose the last thing I'd quite like to ask you about, Amit, is really any advice that you might have for people who are perhaps in your situation. They are thinking about taking on the SQE, but also are thinking more specifically about either using qualifying work experience that perhaps they've already obtained over the last couple of years. They may have been paralegaling. They may have been working as a contracts manager in-house, or like an in-house role. Anything that you would suggest or recommend to them, or any sort of advice in helping them pursue obtaining qualifying work experience or getting it essentially sort of signed off?
Sure. So I personally think the way in which I acquired my qualifying work experience was quite a smart way.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is because when you work in contracts management, it's a profession in itself.
Yeah.
So had I just stayed put, I would have been, at some stage be an eligible candidate to become a commercial director somewhere or a chief commercial officer
Yeah.
somewhere. I could just have progressed through the ranks. So I think it's far better and it's a better fallback than being a paralegal, for example, in a firm that also has trainees in the same firm. Because I think when you are in a position where you're paralegaling into such a firm, the kind of offer is not as enticing.
Mm.
The monies you get paid are not as much. The company already has a preference of who it sees as future solicitors. So, come qualification, you're going to be in a dilemma whether to stay put or find something elsewhere. And being a career paralegal, I don't think many paralegals aspire or get into the world of paralegaling to be a career paralegal. I think it's not a very smart way of picking up work experience. I mean, the offer can be improved if the firms started opening up and really um, dealing with non-qualified fee earners in the spirit that the SRA expects them to. But as far as companies are not making the change, I don't think it's a very safe option. Contracts management, I think, would welcome you in the profession. I think there's a shortage of commercial and contracts management professionals, and there's also qualifications that you can get along in that path, some of which are SIPs, Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply.
Okay.
So it's got a career track, and I would say it's far better to be in that position, bearing in mind that not everyone's going to be able to pass the SQE. So if you don't pass, where does that leave you?
Yeah.
And you want to be left in a good place.
That's a really good piece of advice, because I think some people become very disheartened or disillusioned once they get to the end of SQE and perhaps they haven't been successful, and they're thinking, well, how am I going to use this body of experience? I need to be fully qualified in order to be able to do that. But actually, to your point, there are other roles within the legal sector that are multifaceted nowadays, where having that experience is vital, and you can continue to do that and keep building towards your SQE again at some point in the future. Amit, thank you so much for your time. It's been really nice talking to you today. Many congratulations on being fully qualified now through the SQE, and thanks for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, Rob. My pleasure.
This is QWE and Me, the podcast where we share real stories and advice to help you navigate your journey to becoming a solicitor. I'm Rob Dudley, Head of Employability and Engagement at BARBRI. Thank you for joining us today.